Hi, yes, hello. This video is going to be me rambling and ranting about the Titanic. But let me give you some context for this video first, please. Let me give you some context. All my life, now, first, let me start off. People know me on this channel and everywhere else for being a fan of Harry Potter. Big Harry Potter fan, yes, since childhood. But along with that, I've had another obsession all my life since I was a child, around the same time, I do believe. And it's been with the Titanic. The Titanic is that one iconic shipwreck, the one thing that's happened in the history of this world, in the history of oceanic travel, that anything like that had happened, a tragedy that was beyond avoidable. It was the most unavoidable shipwreck, as far as I'm concerned, ever to happen. And that includes all the other shipwrecks before Titanic. But when I was a young kid, I was in elementary school, and in the library of that school, there was a book. There was a book, and it was this book, The Titanic, Lost and Found. It was this book, and people say, "Well, Mikey, what the fuck's the point? This is a kid's book." It even says right there, "Step into reading. It's a kid's book." Yes, it is, but it's the book that I got from the school library when I was a kid. And the first time I read that book was in third grade. And I would check that book out 3 times a year. Each year I was in elementary school. So 3 times in third grade, 3 times in fourth grade, and 3 times in fifth grade. It got to a point where they tried to stop me from checking this book out because it was the only book I was checking out whenever I went to the school library. It was this book. Not necessarily this book, but it's the same book, just the one I had, and the one that I would check out in the school library had a darker cover art. The cover was darker. The rocket was only one rocket. There's only one, not two, and this wasn't as pronounced. It was a different style of cover art, but it's that book. And for the longest time, because I haven't read this book in 17 years, I have been searching since 2017, actually, for a copy of that book, but I didn't remember the title. I couldn't remember what the book was called. I just knew Titanic. I didn't know that there was a subtext to it. And the last 5 or so years, I've been looking for this book. And just the other day, I went to Google because I was finally ready to put a lot of more effort into the search for that book. That I typed in Titanic books for kids. And I came across the title Titanic Lost and Found after about 45 minutes of looking. And I clicked on it and got some extra pictures of the book. And I seen this picture. And I screamed in joy because I remembered that picture. I remember this art style. This was my book. That was my book, so I bought it. The book I've been searching for, I found it. Proving that if you put enough hard work and determination to something, when you're looking for something, you will find it, and you will have your dreams come true. You just have to work hard for them. And I did. For 5 years, I worked to find this book, and I found it. And I am damn well proud of myself. But it's not just that book. That book is what started me on the Titanic. My obsession, my love for the Titanic. And the fact that a ship dubbed practically unsinkable sinks on its maiden voyage, carrying 2,200 people aboard. And out of those people on board, by the end of the entire event, only 705 survivors. 1,500 plus people died in the North Atlantic Ocean and on the ship itself because there weren't enough boats. And the boats that they did have, most were launched either half full, a quarter full, or barely any people at all because the crew, in my unprofessional opinion, as a Titanic fan, were completely incompetent at what they were doing. Well, we were afraid of the weight, Mr. Andrews. We thought these boats may buckle. You put a boat with 12 people in the water, a boat that could hold 65 to 70 people. You put 12 in that boat. They were tested before you launched the fucking ship. But no, it can hold 65 to here. No, let's just put 12 in there and lower it. There's not like there's more room for more people. The amount of boats they had should have been able to carry half the passengers on that ship, and they carried less than half by the time the ship had sunk. It's incompetence. And another thing, the wireless operators. Yes, the wireless operators, the Marconi radio operators. Harold Bride and Jack Phillips. Those two knew true work. Everyone, not everyone, but so many people, because I go on YouTube, I look at videos of the Titanic, I look up the documentaries because I want to keep learning more and more and more. I come across several about the wireless operators. So many people want to blame Jack Phillips for Titanic hitting an iceberg. Well, if he hadn't told the Californian to shut up, the ship would not have hit the iceberg. Well, let me offer you this as a rebuttal. J. Bruce Ismay, president of White Star Line, the company that owned Titanic and liked to sail on all their ships' maiden voyages, was able to persuade Captain Smith, a extremely professional and experienced captain of ships, talked him into making Titanic light its last 4 boilers to make the ship go as fast as possible because, well, the press already knows about Titanic's speed and being practically unsinkable. We need to give them something new to print. Let's make them go faster. Get to New York a day early. They'll really throw those in the papers. We'll be the talk of the town just because we're the most luxurious and largest and most unsinkable ship on the planet thus far. Let's give them one more thing to talk about. Oh, you gave them something to talk about, all right. For the last over 100 years, we've talked about it. I have personally blamed J. Bruce Ismay for the sinking of the Titanic, and a little bit on Captain Smith because as a professional captain, he should have known better. But Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, being the operators, they were getting ice warnings the last couple of days prior to the sinking. They were getting ice warnings. They take him to the captain. He said, interesting, ice watch. Let's go faster. And Mr. Ismay, there's your crown saying, go faster. That last ice warning that the Californian tried to send to the Titanic would not have done any good. And I don't blame Phillips for telling California's operator to shut up. In a general sense, the Californian and Titanic were on top of one another. They were like, 10, 16 miles away from each other, very close. And the signal and the strength and the sound of the operators, of the headset, the sound, the beeping, the Morse code, depends on your location from another ship. They were so close that the sound that Jack Phillips would have been hearing from the Californian's radio operator in his ears would have been enough to rupture an eardrum, just about. It was very loud. This is why he ripped his headset off and told him to shut up. And on top of that, he hadn't slept in 48 hours. The day before, they had just finished fixing the radio after it had breaking protocol, actually. He was overworked, wasn't sleeping well, stressing out over everything, going through letters, of course, other correspondence from passengers and people from the mainland, and ice warnings, people not listening to the ice warnings like they should have been. He was going to explode. And I can't blame him for that. There are extenuating circumstances that cannot allow me to blame Jack Phillips at all, because there's nothing him as the wireless operator could have done to prevent the tragedy. And I have always and will always blame J. Bruce Ismay and to a certain degree Captain Smith, because he should have known better. But you can actually find a lot in this book. You'd be surprised that even though it's aimed at children, how informative this one book is. And it talks about how the Titanic on the day it was launched, the size of the ship, how it hit the iceberg and was damaged, the way it sank or sunk. It talks about Robert Ballard, who was one of the first people to actually find the wreckage, and then the wreckage itself. And it goes on to talk about how, because of Titanic, certain things were changed. New laws were enacted, rules were changed to be more strict. You have to have a certain amount of lifeboats, and there's no way you can have less than or anything. You have to have a certain amount set lifeboats to accommodate everyone on board, that combining crew and passengers. How there's now the ice patrol, people that go out looking for icebergs to make sure that ships don't get in the way of them, or that they don't get in the way of the ships that cause more trouble. And no ship can be labeled either practically unsinkable or unsinkable, because every ship can sink. There's no doubt about that. And then there's the films, the movie and TV show adaptations of the disaster. Now everyone knows this. Everyone knows about this film. This is one of the most iconic films in cinema history. Is 1997's Titanic, directed by James Cameron. It was a movie blockbuster. It made a lot of money. It's very popular. Everyone loves Jack and Rose, even though they are fake characters that never existed to begin with. And it's a love story on a ship that doesn't even need a love story. And that's my problem with the 1997 film Titanic, that even though I could watch it, I don't watch it for the love story. I watch it for the ship, for the tragedy. I watch it for the actual events. I don't care about these two fake characters that are having their own Romeo and Juliet type of relationship. I don't care about Jack and Rose. Fuck them. I want to hear the story of Titanic, not some mamby-pamby love story. Now, I'm also more partial towards this one, A Night to Remember, based off the same book, released in 1958. Now, because this film came out in 58, it does not show Titanic breaking in half, because the ship was not discovered until 1985, when we find out, oh, the ship broke in half when it sank. Until that point, and even though there was some eyewitness testimony who said that they saw the ship break, there wasn't enough going on for people to actually believe it. So for a lot of these adaptations prior to 1985, the ship sank in one piece. But this film, A Night to Remember, is a very good film. It's a classic movie and goes more in depth with things. It shows more. You see more. Doesn't really focus much on a relationship once it gets to the ship itself. Like there is the opening where it's like a bunch of people talking about Titanic, preparing for Titanic, going on carriage rides and train rides, stuff like that. But when it gets to the actual part of Titanic, you focus just more on the ship, the people who are on the ship, and the events that unfolded over its maiden voyage. Now, again, still talking about films, there is a short film that I highly recommend. I watched a few years back, and it is The Last Signals. It's a Titanic short fan film focusing on Jack Phillips and Harold Bride when they were told by Captain Smith that the ship had hit an iceberg and to wait for further instructions. And then it shows them throughout the night sending out messages, begging for help from other ships, and even showing something that wasn't shown in the original film. I mean, in the 1997 film, an account that Harold Bride talked about at the hearings and stuff, that a worker on the ship, it may have been a coal stoker, one of those people, came in there just before the ship had went under, and was trying to rip the life jacket off Jack Phillips, because Jack Phillips was not wanting to leave his post. He was trying to stay behind and call for help as much as he possibly could, as long as the ship still had power, even though his spark was no longer there. The telegraph had lost complete spark. He was on dead air. And they had to fight off the stoker to get him off of Jack Phillips so they could make it to the boat deck. Now, and then, of course, unfortunately, Jack Phillips would not survive the sinking. He would die because of hypothermia. It's debated where he was at, whether he was in the water and died in the water, or whether he died from hypothermia in a lifeboat. But Harold Bride would survive, although I believe he suffered from severe frostbite on his feet, but he would survive the sinking. And we're going to help the operator on the Carpathia, the rescue ship, send out messages to people. The Titanic is just one of those things that I love. It's a horrifying tragedy. It should never have happened. So many things went wrong. But my obsession with Titanic started from this book, and I wanted to make this video when I got this book, because the day I got it a couple days ago, I went back to reading it, and then I remembered immediately being back in elementary school and falling in love with the story of Titanic for the very first time. It's amazing how many memories can come back to you just from a simple book. And it's really not that simple. Considering I haven't read this book in 17 years, I've been looking all over for this book, and now I have it. And I will never leave it again. I will keep this with me for all time, because I'm afraid if I lose it again, I'll never get it back. It took me so long to find the copy of this book. I think I went to 3 websites, and I managed to find, amongst those 3 websites, 8 copies of this book. And only one copy looked like the copy that I read in school, but I wasn't paying that much for it because it was so expensive. I went for the cheaper option, and that was the redesigned cover. But it's just so hard to find this book, especially people my age who know this book and they don't remember the title. Makes it much harder because it's just so hard to find a title of a book when you don't know the title of it. But I have rambled on for over 15 minutes. I'm sure you all are sick and tired of this, but I just wanted to come on here and make this video because it's something that I fell in love with. It's something that I'm deeply obsessed with. And I am also heartbroken when I found out that the Titanic is predicted to fall apart in the next 30 years. The wreckage of the Titanic is falling apart. It is quickly falling apart nowadays, and they predict it has maybe 25, 30 years before the entire wreck just collapses on itself. And it will just be a pile of wreckage, a pile of metal, and whatever else is still surviving in the North Atlantic Ocean. The Titanic will soon be gone. Nothing more than a memory. And it breaks my heart that once beautiful ship, and now this reminder of what happens when you don't when you don't follow rules, when you don't listen, will soon be nothing but a pile of wreckage. I do want to see you all in the next video. Thank you so much for staying here and listening to me ramble on about a ship. And until next time, I will see you then. Cheers.